pots of money that, as far as I understand, can be used quite quite justifiably. For instance, things like the Easter event, which was budgeted for and didn't happen. So that's similar sort of pot of money. So there are, because what we did before, sometimes when grants came up, we felt they were important and we didn't know about them in the preset time. And as a council, as a committee, you can make decisions that you think are necessary at the time, even if you don't necessarily have the budget. So you've got options, as long as you're responsible. And that's what happens. I think the Jubilee, I can't remember, I'm sure some of the Jubilee stuff came out of reserves.
And is that, so for like the Easter event, is that ring fence that money?
Well,
or
no,
in theory
it was just an allocation that was made at the time in case we wanted to do that event, so we decided not to.
So it probably isn't there.
Well, the money's budgeted for, but it's not been spent.
Right.
So that's why.
The allocations last year, the balances in your annual grants was £1,000 and £1,030. There was £1,000 left over from a website grant. It was just under £500 for Christmas parties. Christmas fair had £3,000 underspend. Place making plan had £1,000 underspend. The Easter fair had £5 underspend. Because I wasn't here, and certainly the grants that were agreed in November last year, I was unaware of, so they took me a bit by surprise. That your Platinum Jubilee event, you spent 7,490, and you overspent the Christmas lights by £1,500, and you gave the Community Trust Committee an extra £5,000, which you'd only budgeted 10,000, and you gave them a £15,000 grant. So in total, the grant, the community support budget was overspent by £7,793 last year. But as I think Gordon has alluded to, the Jubilee events were probably taken out of balances because there was no budget there whatsoever. So that was basically a £7,500 overspend with no budget. And just to put it into context, the end of the year, you actually had an income of just under 1.3 million, expenditure of 950,000. So the difference was an underspend of 335. But when you have movements from reserves, that went down to just under 133,000. So you underspent last year by about 133,000. So there is theoretically funding there in your general balances for you to recommend to council a violent of funding from balances into budget lines. So that's the.
But I need to see these numbers actually, because from what I can see, there's so much confusion in these numbers.
You did see them because this you saw at the council meeting when you signed up the AGAR last month.
Okay.
So you have seen those.
We just break down total sum, didn't we?
No, you had the budget report like this. You have that budget report, which would have had all that information on it. I'm happy to send it to you.
You can send it because I certainly know.
I think it was on the top line stuff.
Yeah.
Is that underspend then? Is that through the skeleton staff? Is that staffing saving, or is that we just not spending money?
It's difficult. I haven't done the variances yet. So there are certain areas that you looks like you've overspent, but actually you've taken an awful lot out of your reserves last year to help fund things like Wellerbrook, which was around 60,000 overspent. So a lot of things were overspent, but they were then counteracted by your reserves. So pretty well, actually. You had, yeah. I mean, it's in the report. You'd have to look at the report. But the reserve movements are sitting in the report.
So on a precept of £435,000 last year, we underspent by 133,000.
Because you got more grant income, and you also had loan. You had loan coming, so you drew down, or the council drew down quite a large element of the loan.
But that's ring fenced for the
for
the
phase
town.
two. But that is all.
That's in that figure, is it?
Yeah, that's what.
Sorry, it's not for the
It's quite creative accounting, isn't it? We're just moving from one to another.
I'm just sorry, but this is just that's a small works loan is set, but that's allocated for the town hall project. I don't think you can count that in our underspend as a town council. And I mean, if you seriously, out of 435,000 at an underspend of 133,000, then either the precepts was completely, the budget was completely wrong. Something doesn't make sense. Does that make sense to anyone?
No, I think there's.
I wonder why we've got that.
Why would we set a precept? Why would we be arguing about set a precept of 498 or 469 when we've got £133,000 underspend?
I don't think it's quite that simple.
Well, it obviously isn't.
No, it's not, because like, there's a few things. So, for instance, I think, like Paul has said, that money will come in from a grant. So it's not like we're spending. It's not like we're kind of taking that money and doing something else with it. But that means we didn't have to spend money on other stuff because we expected all along that grant money to come in. So these things make it complicated. So, like the one that was just mentioned there is the Wellow Brook Walk. That was the town council, I think.
Yeah.
It says £60,000 came from reserves to pay for it. But the £60,000 probably the previous year would have come in through grant funding. And so this kind of movement happens all the time, and I think it's kind of misleading.
You should see that quite clearly on accounts, can't you? If you spent 60k, but a grant of 60k come in, it's a zero balance.
They don't get, well, no, because what I think what happens was we then move into these earmarked reserve funds and they sit around and then we get pulled out when they're needed. I think so, because it isn't.
I think probably what we need to do is put it onto an addendum to actually understand the accounts. What's been spent?
Because we certainly didn't
Well, we need to
understand
look how this is being budgeted because. Yeah, I mean, okay. I mean, I understand that Wellow Brook Walk was paid for by grants.
Yeah.
And I can understand that we may have to find that money up front until the grant money arrives.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But that's the way it should be budgeted. It shouldn't be shown on the accounts as an over or underspend. It's a. I'm just really confused about these accounts. And at the end of it, we've got what we promised the public. We said that the precept leaflet says that the community support grants and events budget is £90,000, and we can see that £90,000 is made up from grants to the community trusts, and included in that is this £19,000 grant allocation. Well, we've only got 7,000 left, and as I say, you can't, in accountancy terms, you can't take something that was put into last year's budget and then move it into this year's budget. You can't take £4,000 that you agreed on last year's budget because you thought you had £8,000, you'd only spent £8,000 of your grant budget, when actually you'd already spent £15,000. So you can't then take that and move it into the 23-24 accounts. That doesn't, or at least if you do, it has to be transparent. So there's a lot of confusion in these figures, and I don't know how we can comfortably allocate money to things like grants without fully understanding exactly where we are financially, and I can't figure it out at this stage. Certainly in terms of grants, maybe overall if we, but I'm struggling with any confidence level in where we are financially. Does anyone?
I totally agree. I think we've been raising that prior to we won the council that we have some concerns.
In a general picture, you can see how the spend was less than expected, because we've managed to run just about skeleton staff.
Absolutely, and I can understand there's a staffing.
And because we didn't have to draw down a lot of that money, because originally
how much was that?
Grant money. Now I can't remember. Did we take out 600,000 out of the loan or something?
Oh, no, the loan was 500. Yeah,
Whatever it is, but the thing is,
no,
we didn't have
how
to
much?
use it all up. So it's now sitting there, isn't it? And the thing is, that's actually generating interest, I think.
Yeah.
It's not being used. So that's probably skewed the figures a bit as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
But it's, I mean, for example, how much have we saved in the last financial year in salary costs against budget?
Well, is that the underspend? No.
Well,
I have sent you the appendices from the full council meetings, so you can look at those at your leisure.
okay. I think we've just, for me personally, I just think we've got to have some confidence in the numbers, and if genuinely there is £133,000 to underspend there, that's fantastic news, because we can really then start to look at our budget and what we can do with it over the next financial year.
I don't believe there can be, because otherwise we would have gone back and forth on the precept and Peter paid Paul to get the amount we needed. Why would we have done that if we had 135,000 left over? We wouldn't.
So the question is, how do we, what do we need to gain confidence in the numbers that we've got?
Look at the reports. I would.
Yeah, that's,
So these
Because
are the full
I've
set
given
of
you all the
accounts.
reports, so it's up to you to have a look at them.
These are two May.
Which ones are those? The ones we've got,
The ones we've got now
These are
are 31st of May. Detailed income and expenditure for the month.
So we would have previous year end.
You had that at the council meeting.
Did we have the full year end ones?
Yes.
The full
Yeah.
detail.
I've literally just resent you all the information that you were sent that supported your end of year sign off. So it's all in your boxes now, and that included an end of year breakdown of the income expenditure. So you've had all this information.
Okay, for whatever reason, none of us have received it, read it.
Well, it was part of the pack, the full council agenda, and it was under agenda items 34, 35 and 36. I mean, seriously, it's on the website.
Okay, so looking at that though, Paul, that's not broken down in the same way this document is that we've got here now.
It's just, you know, I try and provide all the information. I think I'm as big a loss as you are about the way that the budgets were set up last year. I haven't been able to get a handle on how the funding has been organised for town hall.
Just to go on to this document, this still isn't the document that Sean's asking for. This doesn't tell us what's been spent against the budget that was allocated to it. So what it tells us is what's been spent for the year.
If you look down the whole, you know, the 20 pages.
It does total, but it doesn't per budget line.
Well, how much more? Are you happy with that report? Do you understand that report? Does everybody understand that report?
No, we're not saying it.
No, so it's exactly the same. You've got exactly the same report for the last year, for the 12 months last year.
So what do we want to do about the current
34 to
agenda item?
36.
Let's just move on, because clearly this isn't very productive.
Well, it's not productive because I can't manipulate a different report for you to make it any simpler.
Okay, no one's asking you to, Paul. I think we just need to agree what we're going to do for the monthly reports on this agenda item.
for me, as I say, I've got concerns about the numbers, and it's not something we're going to cover in 15 minutes tonight. So we need to, I think, as I say, I'm only, and to be honest, I've only been concentrating at this point on the situation of the grants, so I can understand what money we have available at 5 applications we've got in front of us for grants. But when I look back and I see that it doesn't make sense to me where the grant money has been allocated today, it's not even in the right financial years and stuff, that it doesn't fill me with confidence that we know exactly where we are to be able to make those sort of decisions.
Yeah, I agree with that. So obviously Paul came in and sort of became the town clerk and so helped everyone stay afloat and everything like that, which is great. But there was clearly been quite a messy interim, and everyone's trying to find the answers to these bigger issues, the bigger pots of money and where that's all gone. And so would it make sense to have maybe a look over the last 3 years, or 2 years at least,
I can do you. I'm
to
pretty
sort
sure
of-
I can work out 3 years worth of.
I'm not trying to create work, but just to get an idea
No,
of
no,
what's.
So the grant line that we've got in this one here, grants, annual grants, actual current was 422, actual year to date 11622. So, but we're in month 2. So we agreed £19,000 from to be spent from April.
Yeah.
And that's why Sean said it's been carried over from last year.
But my
So
point is
the
not
other
£4,000 that being last year.
Yeah, so that expenditure, even
Is that because it hasn't been spent? Is that why it's carried over? Or it has been in theory spent,
So,
but we didn't have the money at the time?
so basically what they in March, the council meeting in March, they agreed 2 grants, one of £3,000, one of £1,000 in grant, based on the fact that the figures were showing that they still had available space in the grants from last year. They were saying that the grant they'd only used last year at that point. They were saying that they'd only used £8,020. So there's plenty of room, so we can apply these 2 grants coming to 4,000. The reality was that actually it wasn't 8,000; it was already 15,000. So that extra 4,000 took them over that budget. So for some reason, that 4,000 is now mysteriously moved into the next financial year, which it shouldn't be because it was.
Especially if we've got reserves.
Yeah, so it was allocated and agreed to be in last year's budget. It's now moved into this year's, so which is one of the reasons why we're suddenly finding ourselves with 11,600 already gone from the.
Sorry, I'm not with you on that because your budget at the top and the bottom is 475. That was the amount of money you budgeted last year, was it? It's a bit lower than that, isn't it? So
I don't even understand why we transferred to this year when we've got over 100k left.
No, I think what was one of the things that it might be is that, so for example, the Summer Valley FM, the community transport, Summer Valley FM we agreed to earlier in the year, but for the coming year. So we set the grant budget at £19,000. Yes, we've been paying Summer Valley over 3 years an amount, but we agreed because they came to us. Well, they applied for another £3,000 over 3 years, starting with this financial year. So that money came out already. So £3,000 of the 11,006 was agreed at the end of last year, before the start of the financial year, to come out of this year's financial year.
But you do
So it wasn't. Because they haven't.
Yeah.
So we awarded the money to come out of this year's money in April for this year, then to use this year.
At the same time as the end of the last agreement.
Well, that shouldn't have really.
So you've overlapped two grants of 9,000, so they both end up paying 3,000 on the same day, and they get 6,000 instead of 3,000. And I think
it was compounded by.
It's just understand because I mean even the grant to the market, which I mean nobody disagrees with it, but I can't even find anywhere that was actually agreed by council. It's suddenly appeared that you're going to give them £3,600 over 3 years, but it doesn't seem to appear in any minutes anywhere. So I'm not quite even sure where. So this is why I'm left concerned about what's there that we haven't discovered yet that might surprise us, because we've been surprised by a few things, and I'm just saying perhaps a note of caution. We should just take a step back, just have a look and make sure there's nothing else that's going to catch us out financially, and just make sure we've got all our ducks in a row.
We do need sort of probably more simplified versions of the figures, and these are like kind of heavily detailed. I think sometimes there's a lot to consume, whereas we kind of just want to know the actual position about what we actually spent on stuff.
Yeah.
And how much do we think it's necessary to raise next year to achieve what we want? Whereas looking at this, I think it's quite difficult to get a grip
And
of.
of course, if we're going to start moving funds around from different allocations, so if we're going to start taking money from other events or other departments, then we need to be very cautious about how that those funds are genuinely available, and we need some sort of system which I don't know who mentioned it, but we need some system where we can see actual spend against the against budget, particularly on things like staffing costs and such like.
Well, the two, 4221 and 2, the Arts Pro and the Arts Festival, they have been spent out of this year's precept, and they were agreed. They had to be agreed, and similar to the outfield, which came out of the grant fund, was agreed. I think probably it was the last meeting we had as a previous council for this year's.
Well, I think we've even got an error in your. I mean, in your precepts, if the precept leaflet says that last year you gave the cricket club £2,000 for outfields, and then £2,000 to the cricket club, and then you gave £3,000 for outfields. So that would have been in last year's budget £7,000 to the cricket club. Now I think there's an error. I think that £2,000 to the cricket club and the £2,000 to outfield, I think one of those is wrong. Yet it's in the precept leaflets.
Maybe I don't remember.
So, as I say, there's just all these little anomalies somewhere and little issues that, when you add them all up, come to a very confusing picture of where we currently are.
Well, then we've got two choices. We either historically go back and try and iron it all out, which sounds like an headache, or we work out where we are now. This is like now, before, like you said, before we go around spending money.
I think we just need to know where we are now, aren't we?
Yeah, I think.
We can't go back to years.
No, I agree, but to try and work out where we are now.
Whatever's happened, but we need to understand exactly where we are now financially.
Yeah.
I think there's an argument that is Paul technically our RFO? Your RFO? Your RFO? Someone's to be responsible for that.
Oh yeah, at the moment it's
100%. Right, we have to better understand these sort of figures for our own sanity. I think the way it used to work though is quite often the council would say we want to do something, and then Donna or whoever's at RFO at the time would say, right, it's possible and it's responsibly, it's responsible to do it, and it's not breaking laws, and say, right, okay, so we are allowed to move some money from this to this, the next thing. You're right, perhaps that wasn't something all the councillors knew the nitty-gritty of, but that's how it kind of works. Say, can we do something? And the staff would say, it's okay, and it's financially responsible, so we're not overspending, for instance, and that's, they've managed that side of it.
But it seems, as I say, if my concern is things like, and I say it's not a huge amount of money, 3,600, but if somewhere there's been an agreement for the market, but it doesn't appear on any minutes, where are the decisions, is it possible there's other decisions, financial decisions in that that are going to emerge at some point where something's been agreed outside of the council meeting?
I think the market's quite historical, isn't it? It's a long time to be receiving that grant, like many years ago.
Right.
I think that's
It would have been when there was a finance committee previously.
Well, that only got expanded a year ago or so, but I think the market's been getting that grant for a long time.
Yes.
So that's probably
And no one would disagree with it happening. It's just, and no one would disagree with any of it, really. It's just a case of being financially responsible and knowing that we've budgeted for it, and it's
absolutely. And it's probably even more important going next year as we start to go into the autumn and start thinking again about a precept, which was obviously such a sticky issue last time. We want to know entirely what our figures are, don't we? So hopefully our new RFO.
I mean, in terms of financial management, so I don't fully understand the relationship that we have with Microshade VSM, because I know that the previous council decided to employ them to help provide some financial support.
Yeah, they do our month end at the moment, so there's not enough capacity because what you basically lost was a full-time clerk and a full-time finance officer, and then you lost a part-time admin officer, so it just left me on 21 hours.
I'm not questioning that side of it.
So what I did was, as a temporary measure, is to get external support so that we could do the end of month close down. So basically, Joe does all the inputting and financial information, and then at month end we have a sort of like a health check to make sure that all the invoices that we pay for are against the correct codes and so on. So it's an external overview by somebody that is well versed.
That was answered, but I just want to know how they fit into the equation. That was all. Because financial support is something that we obviously seriously need at the moment, and just understanding where our financial support is going to come from, as we certainly if we're going to be sort of trying to get our head around the budget where we are at the moment.
I mean, hopefully you can once you've got a clerk in place, and the new locum will be fine as well. But once you've got that staff in place, they then basically take over that financial stuff. So it then all comes back in house. The only thing that's left is how you host, whether you host your Rialtus software on the cloud, or whether you put it back on your system.
No, that's fine. It was just trying to understand what resource we have available to us at this moment in time to analyse the accounts and get them into something that we can feel confident in. And that's what I'm just looking at. Where do we find the resource to do that?
I guess that'll come when we've got our review structure standing in place. One thing we can do, which I kind of did a little bit, is it doesn't hurt to go for a bit of a nosy around other town councils and kind of get an idea of how they're often presented and sort of information their councillors, and see what we like, and then we can say to the new staff, say that we find this easier to understand, and maybe work with them to achieve that.
Well, I have Keynsham Town Council, Howard McPhee I work with on the planning committee. Howard is now the chair of Keynsham Town Council, and he's already extended an invite to us if we wanted to go along to their meetings, and if we wanted any assistance, they'd be happy to talk to us. So
that's a good idea.
Yeah. If nothing else, to get to see how another council, how their meetings, how their agendas work. So I've said that I'll certainly go along to one or two of their meetings. Anyone else wants to come along and see how their meetings are held?
Yeah, I'd be interested in that.
The Froome ones are televised as well, quite good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fab. Okay, so we're happy with the monthly report. Anything else to add to that? No? Should we move on to grants? So I don't probably have to do anything with that, do we? It's just see the monthly report.
I think I'm happy to move on to grants, but I'm just nervous of the fact that we've got this elephant in the room, which is, if we do want to agree any grants today, how do you with confidence allocate any funds to it?
Yeah.
Because it's here in the document, isn't it? This one is.
But I think Sean's concern is that we're not 100% sure of the accuracy.
Well,
No, we aren't.
The budget that is out on here is correct, because I've just checked it against what because I restated it, so that we were getting proper.
It doesn't say exactly what it says. Outfield grant, which is for this coming year's Outfield Festival, on the 4th of April. It was transferred. That's £3,000. There's £1,000 for the Play Day grant on the same time. Then it's not itemised, but I believe one of those 3,000 is Summer Valley FM. And then another one is the community transport, which I believe is an ongoing thing, isn't it, over several years, so we're tied into, which will probably finish this year. So
why does that not show up?
And then the other one, the other 3,000 was a mistake that was then reimbursed, wasn't it? There. And there's that 1,200 which I raised on the email, but I'm not sure what that was agreed. I don't remember what that was agreed.
Market then? Is that
No, I don't
1,300?
think it's market, but we must have passed that at the same time. I can't remember what it was.